first day at a new school is never easy, and for Jamal, it felt like stepping into a different world. The tall brick building looked intimidating as he walked through the gates, his backpack hanging loosely on one shoulder. Students rushed past him in groups, laughing, joking, and shouting each other's names. Jamal walked quietly, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar faces, hoping he would blend in without drawing too much attention. He had moved with his mother to this town only a week ago, leaving behind old friends and a familiar neighborhood. His mother believed this new school would give him better opportunities, but Jamal wasn't sure yet. He was the new kid, the outsider. Everyone else already had their circles, their friends, their place. He had none of that. Inside, the hallways were crowded with lockers slamming and sneakers squeaking across the polished floor. Jamal kept his head down, clutching his schedule tightly. His calm face hid the nervous beating of his heart. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want attention. All he wanted was to survive the day quietly. Some kids noticed him as he passed by. Whispers followed. "Who's the new guy? Where's he from? He looks shy." He didn't respond. He wasn't shy, not really, he just preferred silence over unnecessary talk. But to others, his quiet nature seemed like weakness. What nobody knew, and what Jamal didn't feel the need to share, was that behind his calm demeanor lay years of discipline. Since he was little, he had trained in martial arts. His grandfather, a strict but loving man, had taught him not only how to defend himself, but also how to carry himself with dignity and respect. Hours of practice, sweat, and discipline had shaped him into more than an ordinary kid. But he never bragged about it. To Jamal, martial arts wasn't about showing off. It was about control, about using strength only when it was truly needed. Still, on that first day, no one could see that side of him. All they saw was the quiet new boy who didn't talk much and seemed easy to push around. His uniform was neat, his shoes were simple, and he didn't try to join any group. He walked alone from class to class, quietly listening, quietly observing. During lunch, Jamal sat at the far end of the cafeteria, eating slowly while watching the loud groups of kids in the middle. He could see who was popular, who was tough, who was loud, and who was quiet like him. He didn't mind sitting alone. He had been trained to be patient, to never rush into situations. To him, this was just another day of observing. But to others, his silence stood out. Some students whispered that he was too serious, too quiet, maybe even afraid. A few sets of eyes, belonging to boys who thrived on teasing others, began to notice him more than the rest. They smirked at the way he avoided their gaze, thinking they had found their next target. As the afternoon went on, Jamal moved through his classes calmly, answering teachers when asked but never trying to be the center of attention. His voice was polite, steady, but short. He didn't share details about himself. Nobody knew where he came from, what he liked, or what he was capable of. For Jamal, this was exactly how he wanted it. He didn't need to prove himself on the first day. He didn't need everyone's approval. What mattered was staying true to the lessons his grandfather had drilled into him. Patience, discipline, respect. He repeated those words silently in his mind, keeping himself centered even when he felt like an outsider. When the final bell rang, Jamal walked out into the yard, the autumn wind brushing against his face. He thought about his day, quiet, uneventful, just the way he wanted it. But as he crossed the yard, he could feel eyes following him. A group of older boys leaned against the fence, whispering, pointing, and laughing quietly to each other. He noticed them but kept walking. His grandfather had always told him, "Never look for trouble, but if trouble finds you, stand strong." That day, Jamal didn't realize he had already caught the attention of the wrong people. His calmness had been mistaken for weakness, his silence for fear. To them, he was just the new black kid who didn't talk, an easy target to test their cruelty on. But Jamal knew something they didn't. He carried within him a strength no one could see yet. He was more than just the new kid. Beneath the quiet surface lived a martial arts genius, one who could surprise anyone who dared to push him too far. That first day ended without conflict, but the stage was already set. The bullies had noticed him. They thought they had found an easy victim. Little did they know they had chosen the wrong boy to mess with. The second day at school began much like the first. Jamal arrived quietly, slipping through the gates with his backpack slung over one shoulder. He didn't like standing out. He preferred to move through the halls unnoticed, just another face in the crowd. But this time, the crowd had already seen him. The new kid was no longer invisible. As he walked past the lockers, he could feel eyes following him. Whispers trailed behind, little murmurs that reached his ears. "That's the new guy. Doesn't talk much. He looks scared." He ignored them, keeping his head down, his step steady. Jamal had learned long ago that reacting to every word only gave bullies more power. But among the curious faces were a few that weren't just curious, they were hungry. A group of boys, notorious in the school for picking on anyone smaller or weaker, had already marked him. They were led by Marcus Reed. Not the quiet Marcus like our janitor story, but a very different one. This Marcus was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore his arrogance like a crown. Everyone knew him and his gang. They ruled the hallways not through respect, but through fear. Marcus Reed was the kind of bully who thrived on control. He and his friends would knock books out of students' hands, trip kids in the cafeteria, and laugh at anyone who dared to look upset. Teachers often scolded them, but nothing seemed to stick. They always returned the next day, bolder than before. When Marcus Reed first saw Jamal on that quiet first day, he hadn't paid much attention. But by the second day, the whispers about the new kid had reached him. A shy one. A quiet one. Perfect. "Hey, Reed," one of his buddies said, pointing as Jamal walked past. "There's your new target. Look at him. Doesn't even make eye contact." Reed smirked, his eyes narrowing. "Easy pickings. He looks like he'd cry if you just shouted at him." The group chuckled, already tasting the fun they thought they'd have. Jamal, however, kept moving, unaware of the storm gathering behind him. Later that day, in the cafeteria, it began. Jamal carried his tray to his usual quiet corner, the same spot he had sat the day before. He was halfway through his sandwich when Reed and his crew approached. The cafeteria seemed to shift when they walked in, the noise dipping as students glanced nervously in their direction. Reed slammed his hand down on Jamal's table, making his milk carton jump. Well, look who we've got here, the new kid." His voice dripped with mockery, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Jamal looked up slowly. His eyes met Reed's for a moment, steady and calm, before he returned to his sandwich. He didn't say a word. The lack of reaction made Reed's smirk falter. He wasn't used to being ignored. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just too scared to talk?" His buddies laughed loudly, trying to draw more attention. Jamal chewed quietly, then placed his sandwich back down. "I just don't like wasting words," he said softly. That simple response made the group pause. Reed blinked, then let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, he's got a mouth after all. Thinks he's too good to talk to us. Huh." He shoved Jamal's tray, spilling food across the table. "Welcome to your new school, kid. Around here, you earn your place." The cafeteria watched in silence. Some students looked away, not wanting to be involved. Others whispered, waiting to see what the new kid would do. Jamal calmly picked up his tray, wiped the mess with a napkin, and stood. His movements were controlled, not rushed, not panicked. He walked past Reed and his gang without another word, his head held high. Reed's smirk twisted into irritation. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he barked, but Jamal didn't turn. His quiet defiance left the bullies unsettled. That was when Reed made his mistake. He mistook Jamal's calmness for weakness. In his world, silence meant fear. He didn't understand that for Jamal, silence was strength. The rest of the day, Reed and his gang followed Jamal with their eyes. They muttered jokes when he walked by, whispered insults just loud enough for him to hear. "Scaredy cat. Silent freak. Easy prey." Jamal heard them all, but he never reacted. At home that night, Jamal sat cross-legged on the floor of his small room. His mother was cooking dinner in the kitchen, humming softly, while Jamal practiced his breathing exercises. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. "Control your breath, and you control your heart. Control your heart, and you control the fight." He thought about the bullies. He thought about Reed's smug grin and the laughter of his friends. A part of him burned to prove them wrong, to show them what he was capable of. But another part, the disciplined part, reminded him that martial arts was not for showing off. It was for defense, for respect, for balance. Still, he knew one truth. Bullies never stopped until they were forced to. Back at school, Reed and his gang were already planning. By the third day, they were ready to push harder. "We'll corner him," Reed told his friends. "Let's see how long that quiet act lasts when he's got nowhere to run." The stage was set. The bullies had noticed the new black kid, and they had mistaken his silence for weakness. What they didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was that they weren't hunting prey. They were walking straight into the path of a martial arts genius. The next morning, Jamal walked into school the same way he always did, quiet, steady, not looking for trouble. His backpack hung on his shoulder, his steps measured, his expression calm. To anyone who didn't look closely, he seemed like just another student trying to get through the day. But the bullies weren't just any students. They had been waiting for him. Marcus Reed and his gang spotted him almost instantly. They were leaning against the lockers, their voices loud, their laughter sharper than usual. When Jamal passed by, they straightened, their eyes following him like a pack of wolves stalking prey. "Morning, new kid," Reed called out, his voice echoing through the hallway. "You sleep okay? Or did you cry yourself to sleep after lunch yesterday?" His friends laughed, shoving each other, eager for a show. Jamal didn't stop. He didn't even look at them. His calm silence made Reed's grin falter for a split second, then return, wider and meaner. The first encounter came quickly. In the middle of second period, Jamal walked toward the restroom, only to find Reed and two of his buddies waiting outside the door. They blocked his path, arms crossed, smug smiles plastered across their faces. "Going somewhere, quiet boy?" one of them sneered. Jamal looked at them evenly, his voice calm. "Yes, excuse me." Reed stepped forward, shaking his head mockingly. "You don't just walk past us like that. You've got to earn your way, remember?" He jabbed a finger into Jamal's chest. The jab wasn't hard, but it was meant to test him, to see if the new kid would flinch. Jamal didn't. His eyes locked on Reed's, steady and unreadable. That silence, it unnerved them more than any words could. The second encounter came later in the cafeteria. Jamal was carrying his lunch tray when one of Reed's friends deliberately bumped into him, knocking his apple onto the floor. Laughter broke out at nearby tables. The bully smirked. "Oops, guess clumsy runs in your family." Jamal bent down, picked up the apple, wiped it on his sleeve, and calmly placed it back on his tray. He didn't lash out. He didn't even glare. He just walked away. The bullies frowned. Something about his reaction wasn't right. They were used to anger, to shouting, to fear. But Jamal gave them nothing. No fear. No anger. Just quiet dignity. But to Reed, that calmness was like gasoline on fire. He wanted a reaction, and he wasn't going to stop until he got one. The third encounter came at the end of the day. Jamal was at his locker, gathering his books, when Reed's gang surrounded him. This time there was no subtlety. They boxed him in, their smirks sharper, their voices louder. "Hey, genius," Reed sneered, leaning against the locker beside him. "We've been so nice and you still don't talk to us. That's rude." Jamal closed his locker gently, slid his books under his arm, and looked at Reed. His voice was low, but steady. "I don't owe you conversation." Gasps came from nearby students who had stopped to watch. It wasn't loud, but Jamal's words cut deeper than shouting ever could. Reed's face twisted. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But let's see if you've got anything else." He shoved Jamal hard against the lockers. The sound of the impact echoed through the hall. For a second, everyone thought Jamal would finally fight back. But he didn't. He steadied himself, adjusted his books, and walked away. Not a word more, not a glance back. The hallway buzzed with whispers. Why didn't he fight? He's scared. No. Did you see his face? He wasn't scared. And that was the truth. Jamal wasn't afraid. He wasn't weak. He was choosing silence, choosing control. Every time the bullies tested him, he reminded himself of his grandfather's lessons. The first victory is not over your enemy. It is over yourself. If you cannot master your temper, you cannot master the fight. But the bullies didn't understand discipline. To them, silence was weakness, and weakness was an invitation. That night, Reed bragged to his gang. He's easy. Doesn't even fight back. Tomorrow, we corner him for real. Let's see how long that quiet act lasts when he's got nowhere to go. They laughed, already imagining the scene. To them, it was a game. To Jamal, it was something else entirely. He had endured the first encounters with patience, holding back the storm inside him. But deep down, he knew the time was coming when patience alone would no longer be enough. And when that time came, the bullies would discover that the quiet new kid wasn't what they thought he was. The week dragged on, and with every passing day the bullies pushed harder. Jamal had endured their shoves, their taunts, and their sneers, but it was clear they were no longer satisfied with small games. Reed, burning with frustration over Jamal's calm silence, wanted a spectacle. He wanted to break him, not just for his own pride, but to show the entire school that nobody ignored Marcus Reed and got away with it. Friday afternoon, the air in the school carried a strange tension. Word had spread that Reed and his gang were planning something. Students whispered in corners, exchanging glances toward Jamal. He walked down the hall with his usual quiet stride, not rushing, not slowing, but he could feel the weight of the stairs. People expected a showdown. Reed's crew had been waiting. They didn't choose the classroom or the cafeteria or the hallways filled with teachers. They waited until the last bell rang, when students spilled out of the building, their chatter filling the cool air. That was when they cornered him. The yard outside the school became their stage. Reed and his 3 friends stepped in front of Jamal, blocking his path. Behind him, another 2 boys cut off his retreat. The crowd sensed something was about to happen, and within minutes, a circle had formed. Students leaned on bikes, sat on benches, or stood on the grass, their phones ready to record. Reed stepped forward, his chest puffed out. "Well, look who's here. The silent prince," he said mockingly, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've been walking around all week, acting like you're too good to talk to us. But today, you don't get to walk away." Jamal stopped, his book still in his hands. He looked around, seeing the circle closing in, the expectant faces, the phones held high. His eyes finally rested on Reed. Calm, unshaken. "I don't want trouble," Jamal said quietly. Reed smirked. "Trouble found you. That's how this works." He shoved Jamal's books out of his hands. They hit the ground, pages scattering in the dirt. The crowd gasped, a ripple of laughter running through them. Jamal bent down slowly, picking up the books with steady hands. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. His movements were so controlled it made Reed frown. It wasn't fear. It was patience, something Reed couldn't understand. "Still not fighting back?" Reed jeered. "You must really be scared. Or maybe you think you're better than us." He pushed Jamal again, harder this time, making him stumble. The crowd's excitement grew. Phones zoomed in. Whispers turned to shouts. "Fight him. Stand up to him. Don't just take it." But Jamal stayed calm. He stood straight, dusted off his shirt, and said softly, "I don't fight without reason." That single line, delivered so calmly, unsettled Reed more than if Jamal had yelled. The bully's face twisted with anger. "You don't fight without reason? Well, guess what? I'm giving you one." He raised his fist, ready to swing. The crowd held its breath. This was the moment they had been waiting for. But Jamal didn't flinch. His eyes locked onto Reed's fist, calm and steady, his body relaxed but ready. He had been trained for this his whole life. Every muscle in his body remembered the countless drills, the endless hours of practice, the lessons of control. Reed's fist hovered for a second, as if even he hesitated. But his pride wouldn't let him stop. He swung. The punch never landed. Jamal's body moved with speed and precision that shocked everyone watching. In a blur, he sidestepped, his hand snapping up to redirect Reed's arm harmlessly past him. Reed stumbled forward, his balance broken, nearly crashing into his own friend. The crowd gasped. Silence fell for a brief moment before voices rose in shock. What was that? Did you see how fast he moved? Reed spun back around, his face red with rage. He charged again, throwing another punch, then another. But Jamal flowed like water, shifting his weight, dodging each strike with minimal effort. His movements were graceful, controlled, like a dancer but sharper, stronger. One of Reed's friends tried to grab Jamal's shoulder from behind. In an instant, Jamal pivoted, twisting the boy's arm just enough to send him stumbling to the ground without injury. Another gasp ran through the crowd. Phones shook as kids tried to capture the impossible speed of his reactions. Reed froze, breathing heavily. His fists clenched, his pride crumbling. He had thrown everything he had at Jamal, and the new kid hadn't even broken a sweat. Jamal stood tall, his voice calm but firm. I told you, I don't fight without reason. Don't give me one. The words hit harder than any punch. The crowd erupted, not in laughter at Jamal, but in awe. Cheers and shouts filled the air. Students who had doubted him moments ago were now on his side, chanting his name. Reed's face burned with humiliation. He wanted to keep fighting, but something in Jamal's eyes stopped him. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger. It was strength, the kind of strength Reed had never faced before. And in that moment, Reed realized he wasn't the predator. He was the fool. The escalation had backfired. The bullies thought they would humiliate Jamal. Instead, they had exposed him for what he truly was. A boy of discipline, control, and extraordinary skill. The fight wasn't over yet, but the balance of power had shifted. Jamal had revealed just enough to shock them, just enough to shake their confidence. The crowd would never look at him the same way again. And as Jamal picked up his books and calmly walked out of the circle, the bullies were left standing in silence, their pride broken, their reputations beginning to crumble. The yard was buzzing. Students crowded tighter, their voices rising in disbelief. Everyone had seen the impossible. The quiet new kid, the one they thought was shy and powerless, had just slipped past Marcus Reed's punches like he was moving in slow motion. It didn't seem real. Jamal stood calm in the center of the circle, his books tucked under one arm now, his eyes steady, his breathing controlled. His body was relaxed, but his stance carried a quiet authority. To those watching closely, it was the stance of someone who had spent years training, balancing, mastering control. But to the bullies, it was infuriating. Marcus Reed's face burned with humiliation. His pride had taken a hit in front of everyone, and he couldn't let it go. Don't just stand there, he roared, motioning to his friends. Get him. Two of his crew rushed forward at once, one from the left, the other from the right. The crowd gasped. Jamal didn't move until the last second, his eyes calculating. Then, like water flowing around rocks, he shifted. The boy on the left swung wildly, but Jamal leaned back, his palm shooting forward in a sharp, controlled strike. Not to hurt, but to redirect. The bully stumbled forward, his own momentum carrying him face first into the dirt. The boy on the right lunged to grab Jamal's shoulder. Jamal spun, catching his wrist, twisting just enough to throw him off balance, then guided him to the ground with a precision that looked effortless. Gasps and cheers erupted around them. The crowd couldn't believe it. Every move Jamal made was smooth, sharp, and precise like something out of a movie. He wasn't just defending himself. He was controlling the entire fight without breaking a sweat. Phones shook as kids filmed, shouting over the roar of excitement. Did you see that? He flipped him without even trying. What is he, like, a ninja? Marcus Reed's smirk had completely vanished. He stared wide-eyed at Jamal, who stood tall and calm again, his books still tucked under his arm. He hadn't even dropped them. You don't want this fight, Jamal said, his voice low but carrying across the yard. Walk away. The words weren't loud, but they struck harder than any insult. It wasn't a threat. It was confidence, pure and undeniable. But Marcus couldn't back down. His pride wouldn't allow it. He charged again, fists swinging wildly, his rage blinding him. This time, Jamal didn't just dodge. With lightning speed, he stepped into Marcus's strike, his arm blocking with perfect form. In the same motion, his foot swept low, knocking Marcus off balance. Before Reed could hit the ground, Jamal shifted again, twisting his body with grace and power, guiding Marcus to the dirt in one smooth, controlled motion. The yard erupted. Cheers, screams, shouts. Students couldn't contain themselves. What they had just seen wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was mastery. Marcus scrambled back to his feet, his face red, his chest heaving. He charged one more time, desperate, furious. But Jamal was ready. With a swift sidestep, he let Marcus's momentum carry him past. Then, with a gentle push to the back, Marcus stumbled forward, crashing into the fence. The crowd exploded with laughter and cheers. Marcus stood frozen, gripping the fence, his pride shattered. He had been humiliated not once, but 3 times, and the new kid hadn't even broken a sweat. The other bullies hesitated now. None of them wanted to be next. They looked at Jamal with wide eyes, their bravado gone, replaced with something they'd never felt toward him before, fear. Jamal, however, wasn't gloating. He didn't grin or taunt them. He simply stood tall, his breathing steady, his eyes calm. His movements had been precise, controlled, and restrained. He hadn't hurt anyone. He hadn't lashed out. He had only defended himself, showing enough of his skill to make a point. And that was when the crowd truly understood. Jamal wasn't just good. He wasn't just fast. He was something else entirely. He was a martial arts genius. Whispers rippled through the students. Did you see the way he moved? He could have destroyed them if he wanted to. He's trained. He's the real deal. Marcus Reed, once untouchable, now stood shaking, his chest rising and falling as he glared at Jamal. But even he knew the truth. He had been beaten, not by brute force, but by skill so refined it left no room for doubt. Jamal bent down, picked up the last of his scattered books, and tucked them neatly under his arm again. He looked at Marcus one final time. I warned you. Don't mistake silence for weakness. The crowd roared with approval. Students clapped, some chanted his name, others stood in stunned silence, realizing they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Jamal didn't stay for their praise. He simply walked out of the circle, calm and composed, his back straight, his head high. He didn't need the applause. He didn't need the validation. He had proven what needed to be proven, not just to Marcus and his gang, but to everyone watching. The hidden talent had surfaced. And now, the entire school knew that the quiet new kid wasn't someone to underestimate. He was someone to respect. And for Marcus Reed, the self-proclaimed king of the schoolyard, the shock of that truth cut deeper than any punch could have. The sound of cheering still hung in the air long after Jamal had stepped out of the circle. Students crowded closer, buzzing with excitement, their voices overlapping like waves crashing against each other. What they had just witnessed was something they would never forget. The quiet new kid, the one everyone thought was shy, weak, and easy prey, had turned the schoolyard into his stage. And the bullies who once seemed untouchable now stood shaken, their pride crumbling before the eyes of the entire crowd. Marcus Reed leaned against the fence, his chest heaving, his face flushed with a mix of rage and humiliation. His crew stood frozen around him, their usual smirks wiped clean, replaced with nervous stares. None of them dared to step forward again. They had seen what Jamal could do, and worse, they had felt it. His moves weren't clumsy or desperate. They were precise, practiced, and terrifyingly controlled. Jamal hadn't even needed to hurt them. He had shown that he could, if he wanted to. That was the real shock. The turnaround began slowly. At first, the crowd erupted with laughter at Reed, pointing, whispering, filming. For years, Reed had ruled the schoolyard, feared for his size, his fists, and his cruelty. But now, here he was, struggling to catch his breath, outsmarted and outmatched by someone he had underestimated. The laughter wasn't cruel this time, it was justice. It was relief. For the first time, Reed wasn't the predator. He was the prey. Students who had once been silent victims of his bullying felt something shift inside them. They stood straighter, smiled wider, their eyes glowing with a mix of joy and hope. Jamal hadn't just defended himself. He had done what so many of them had dreamed of but never dared. He had stood up to the biggest bully in the school and won. Reed tried to speak, his voice hoarse. "This isn't over," he muttered, glaring at Jamal's retreating back. But his words held no weight. The crowd didn't believe him anymore. The fear that once followed Reed's every threat had vanished. Instead, all eyes turned to Jamal as he walked calmly away, his books in his arms, his shoulders relaxed. He wasn't strutting or boasting. He wasn't even smiling. That calmness, that dignity was what stunned them most. He had the power to humiliate Reed even further, but he chose not to. He didn't need to. The whispers grew louder. Did you see how he moved? He didn't even fight angry, he was in control. Reed never stood a chance. Phones buzzed as videos spread instantly among the students. Clips of Jamal dodging punches, flipping bullies to the ground, and walking away unbothered flooded social media. By the time the last bell of the day rang, half the school had already seen what happened. In the teacher's lounge, rumors began to circulate. Some teachers frowned, worried about violence, but others couldn't hide a small smile. They knew Reed's reputation well, and some quietly felt he had finally met his match. The shocking turnaround wasn't just about the fight, it was about power. For years, Reed's name had been synonymous with control. But in one afternoon, Jamal had shifted that balance. Now, when Reed walked down the hall, whispers followed him. Not of fear, but of mockery. And when Jamal walked by, heads turned with respect. That evening, Reed sat with his gang in their usual hangout spot behind the basketball courts. None of them laughed. None of them teased each other. They sat in silence, the weight of what happened pressing down like a storm cloud. Reed's jaw clenched as he replayed the fight over and over in his mind. He couldn't understand how Jamal had moved so quickly, how he had controlled the fight so easily. It wasn't just luck. It was training, years of it. And Reed knew it. But Jamal? He wasn't dwelling on it. At home, he ate dinner with his mother, listening to her talk about her day. Later, in his room, he practiced quietly, stretching, breathing, moving through slow martial arts forms under the dim light. To him, it wasn't about the victory. It wasn't about being popular. It was about discipline, balance, and staying true to himself. He hadn't fought to humiliate Reed. He had fought to defend himself, and to remind the bullies that silence did not mean weakness. The next day at school, the turnaround was complete. Students who once ignored Jamal now nodded at him in the hallways. Some whispered his name with respect. Others smiled shyly, grateful for what he had done. Even those who had doubted him now looked at him differently. Reed, on the other hand, walked with his head down. His swagger was gone. His friends trailed behind him in silence, their laughter muted. Every step he took reminded him that he wasn't feared anymore. He had been exposed, and the school wouldn't forget it. For Jamal, it was never about revenge. It was about control. And the fact that he had shown his strength without cruelty made the impact even greater. The shocking turnaround wasn't just in the fight. It was in the hearts of everyone who watched. The quiet new kid had changed the story of the school in a single afternoon. And nothing, no rumor, no excuse, no threat, could ever undo that. The Monday after the fight was different from any school day Jamal had ever experienced. The moment he stepped through the gates, the atmosphere had changed. Students who barely noticed him before now turned their heads. Some whispered to their friends, others pointed discreetly, and more than a few gave him small nods as he passed. Jamal noticed it all, but he didn't let it show on his face. His stride was the same, calm, steady, unhurried. He didn't bask in the attention or smile at the whispers. To him, nothing had changed. He was still the same boy who preferred silence over noise, still the one who carried books in his arms instead of looking for trouble. But to everyone else, he was no longer the new kid. He was the boy who had stood up to Marcus Reed and walked away untouched. In the cafeteria, the difference was even clearer. Normally, Jamal would sit at the far corner table, alone, quietly finishing his lunch. But that day, the empty seat didn't last long. A few students approached nervously, carrying their trays. "Mind if we sit here?" one of them asked, half expecting him to refuse. Jamal simply nodded. Soon more joined. Not all of them spoke, but their presence said enough. They wanted to be near him, not out of fear, but out of admiration. The quiet corner of the cafeteria that once seemed isolated now felt alive with new energy. Jamal listened more than he spoke, answering only when necessary, but his calmness drew them in. Across the room, Marcus Reed and his gang sat hunched at their usual table, but the dynamic had shifted. The laughter that once boomed from their corner was gone. Their eyes darted nervously toward Jamal's table, and every time they met his calm gaze, they quickly looked away. For the first time, they weren't the center of attention. They were shadows. Respect is a strange thing, it can't be forced and it can't be faked. Reed had demanded it through fear, but Jamal had earned it through action. He hadn't boasted. He hadn't humiliated anyone. He had defended himself with control and walked away with dignity. That restraint spoke louder than any punch. Later that week, Jamal was walking through the hallway when a younger boy, barely a freshman, hurried up to him. The boy's hands trembled as he held his books. "Hey," he said softly, looking around to make sure no one was watching. "I just wanted to say, thanks. You don't know me, but Reed used to mess with me a lot. He doesn't anymore." Jamal paused, then placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "You don't owe me thanks," he said quietly. "But you owe yourself this. Don't let anyone make you feel small." The boy nodded quickly, his eyes shining with relief, before hurrying off. Moments like that happen more often now. Students who once avoided eye contact came forward, some just to nod in silent respect, others to share how much courage it gave them to see Reed finally fall. Jamal never lingered on their praise. He didn't see himself as a hero. He saw himself as someone who had done what was necessary. Even teachers noticed the change. Some gave him approving looks, though no one openly mentioned the fight. But Jamal could sense it. The adults knew what had happened, and though they couldn't condone it, they quietly acknowledged that justice had been served in a way discipline slips and detentions never could. For Reed, the shift was unbearable. Walking through the halls, he could feel the stares, the whispers, the smirks. His old confidence had evaporated. Where once students stepped aside for him, now they barely acknowledged him. Where once his laughter filled the air, now silence followed him. One afternoon, Jamal passed Reed by the lockers. The crowd parted slightly, expecting tension, maybe even another fight. But Jamal simply walked by, his expression calm, his gaze steady. Reed stiffened, his fists clenching, but he didn't move. He couldn't. The fight had been settled, and no amount of anger could rewrite what everyone had seen. That was when the respect became permanent. Jamal hadn't gloated. He hadn't rubbed Reed's defeat in his face. He had simply walked past, showing that he wasn't interested in dominance. He wasn't a bully, and he wasn't there to replace Reed as king of the schoolyard. He was just Jamal, disciplined, calm, and unshakable. That quiet strength earned more admiration than any show of arrogance ever could. By the end of the week, Jamal's presence alone changed the energy of the school. Fights became less frequent. Bullies hesitated before picking on anyone. The younger kids walked the halls with a little more confidence, knowing someone like Jamal existed among them. Respect had spread like wildfire, not because Jamal demanded it, but because he deserved it. And though he still sat quietly at his table, still carried his books calmly, still spoke only when necessary, everyone around him knew. This was no ordinary boy. This was someone special. The respect he had earned wasn't built on fear. It was built on discipline, on restraint, on the simple but powerful truth that real strength doesn't need to shout. And that was something the entire school would carry with them for a long, long time.